On January 15, 1919, a 55-foot wave of molasses moved through Boston at 35 miles per hour, and nobody saw it coming. The thing is, someone should have. A massive steel tank 90 feet tall and 90 feet wide had been sitting on the waterfront for years, holding 2-3 million gallons of industrial molasses. It wasn't just old, it was built wrong, inspected poorly, and everyone involved knew there were cracks. Exhibit 1, the tank itself. Built in 1915 by the Purity Distilling Company, it was designed to hold molasses for rum production. But the design was thin-walled steel, not reinforced, not calculated properly for the weight and pressure of that much liquid. The company knew it leaked. Workers had painted it brown repeatedly to hide the seepage. Exhibit 2, the inspection regime. Boston had building inspectors they visited, but they didn't check the welds, they didn't pressure test the structure, they didn't hire an engineer to calculate whether the walls could handle the load. Why? Because there was no legal requirement. Molasses tanks weren't regulated the way bridges or boilers were. Exhibit 3, the temperature. January in Boston is cold. Molasses is thick, it barely flows when it's warm. When temperatures drop, it becomes brittle, less flexible. On January 15th, it was around 40 degrees. That morning, the tank had been topped off. The pressure inside was at its peak. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the bottom seams gave. A riveted joint, already weakened by constant seepage, simply split open. The molasses didn't trickle out. It exploded outward, a wave 25 feet high, traveling at speeds the witnesses could barely describe. One survivor said it sounded like thunder. The wave hit the neighborhood. It toppled buildings. It knocked over the supports of the elevated railroad track. It crushed wooden structures like they were paper. In the chaos, 21 people died, some from the impact, others trapped in the molasses as it hardened around them. But here's where the economics kick in. The Purity Distilling Company didn't build that tank to save money on molasses storage. They built it because molasses was cheap, cheaper than ever before, thanks to new refining techniques and Caribbean trade. The tank let them store massive quantities at once. Cheaper molasses meant cheaper rum production, which meant higher profits. But cheaper also meant corners cut on construction. The company hired a designer, not an engineer. They didn't overspec the materials. They didn't build redundancy. Why spend extra when the math said it would hold? The regulatory gap was real. In 1919, there was no OSHA, no federal safety standards for industrial storage. Insurance companies didn't require engineer sign-offs. Local governments had no template for what safe actually meant. The tank passed inspections because the bar for passing was invisible. After the flood, lawsuits flew. The company settled for $600,000, roughly $12 million in today's money. Insurance covered some. The rest came from the company's balance sheet. It was expensive, but it was cheaper than it would have been if they'd engineered the tank properly from the start. The real cost, though, wasn't paid by the company. It was paid by the families of the 21 dead, by the workers injured, by the neighborhood that had to be cleaned, molasses everywhere, impossible to remove fully. The smell lasted for months. What's staggering is how this pattern repeats. When regulation is weak, when inspection is cursory, when cost-cutting is invisible to the consumer, the incentive to cut corners is enormous. The molasses tank wasn't an anomaly, it was the rule. Coal mines, textile mills, chemical plants, they all operated under the same logic. If the regulations don't require it and nobody's watching, you can save money by cutting safety. The disaster is the exception. The neglect is the standard. The molasses flood forced change. Massachusetts tightened building codes. Insurance companies started requiring engineer certifications. Other states watched and learned. The cost of that tank failure, in lives, in legal fees, in reputation, eventually made safety cheaper than neglect. But that lesson only stuck because the disaster was visible, catastrophic, and happened in a city with newspapers. For every molasses flood, there were dozens of smaller failures, leaks, collapses, fires that barely made local news. The ones that didn't kill enough people to matter, they just cost a company some money. Then business continued. So when you look at why something costs what it does today, why a product has safety certifications, why a building has redundant systems, why insurance exists, you're looking at the price of past disasters. Every regulation is a memorial. Every inspection is a ghost. The molasses that flooded Boston in 1919 wasn't just a commodity. It was a window into how markets work when nobody's watching. Cheap, efficient, profitable, right up until the moment it kills 21 people. Then the cost suddenly becomes visible. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to uncover the hidden costs behind everyday infrastructure, the stories that explain why things are built and regulated the way they are. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.